Welcome into PressBox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. With me is my co-host on these Thursday night excursions into the world of sports newsmakers, Gary Stein. And Gary, we've got one of our favorite people here who I'm going to introduce in just a second, right after I tell folks that we are brought to you by the Costas Inn. And everybody knows the Costas Inn, one of the great places in our town to stop by and eat crabs, crab cakes, steaks, salads, chicken, whatever. But during the pandemic, they stepped up their game in the carryout world. They are now one of the preeminent places in Baltimore for carryout. 410-477-1975 is their phone number. Go to costasin.com to check out the menu. And Gary, one of our favorite people, is former Ravens PR Vice President of Public Relations, Kevin Byrne, and now we can say retired former NFL PR
He looks
executive.
great.
You look great, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Stan.
You look what was that movie with Brad Pitt when he went backwards, buttons? You look younger than you did.
Oh, good. I'm trying.
How you feeling? Feeling good?
Really good. Really good.
Sally and everybody good? The kids
yep,
good?
my wife and I moved down to Hilton Head.
Yep.
And so, while I consulted for the Ravens the last 2 years, I've decided not to do that anymore. And I'm just going to enjoy the team as a fan right now and still keep those friendships that I think will last the rest of my life. But
absolutely,
this is fun down here.
So my first question really was going to be whether or not you missed it at all, because we're getting ready. We're 1 week away from tonight. Will be the NFL draft, and that had to be one of the most electric and connected that the organization felt on one given night. Do you miss it at all?
Yes, I missed game day. I miss people like Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh and Ozzie and the rest of the crew. And I miss what is in the NFL Christmas, which is the draft. We know we're going to have presents. We just don't know what's going to be there when we unwrap them on those 3 days of the draft. I think the 3 days of the draft, and the NFL has made it such a huge event, are three of the best days of sports year round. In fact, it'll be amazing. Next Thursday night, the first night of the draft, they'll go up against NBA playoffs, hockey playoffs, all the Major League Baseball teams. You could add up all the numbers from those three others, and it won't equal what people watching a list of names, which is the NFL draft. And that's amazing how interesting and how much attention the draft gets.
Why do you think the draft engenders such interest, Kevin? It wasn't always this way. Obviously, it used to be held on a weekday afternoon, and you just sort of followed it on the ticker tape. But what do you think it is about the draft? Is it hope? Is it hope?
I think it is. It's always hope. Every team, even the Rams fans have hope, that they'll do it again. But, hope is what you sell. That people have to believe in you. People have to believe in the Ravens, have to believe in Steve Bisciotti's ownership, have to believe in Harbs and Lamar and the JK's coming back and all those things. But the draft has become an industry. There are people, and Mel Kiper, Baltimore's own, Calvert Hall High School, he led the charge. He created a whole business based on preparing for the draft. Years ago, we wouldn't know one guy from the other, and you kind of scratch your head, whoa, I hope that guy's good. Now right. You know so much about that guy because you have the Mel Kipers of the world for months, ever since the Super Bowl, talking about, boy, it would really be good if the Baltimore Ravens got a guy like Stan Charles, and so it becomes a culture in itself, and I think that's part of how it's become so big. I also think pro football fans are pretty sophisticated, and they really understand that the draft is the lifeblood. You have to historically, you have to draft well to win Super Bowls.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Kevin, let me pick up on that, because out of all the teams in the NFL, the Ravens certainly have to rank as one of the highest when it comes to using the draft as their lifeblood, as you well know. But I want to go back to the first draft back in 1996. There are a lot of Ravens fans that are coming of age right now. Well, first of all, it's hard to believe the franchise has been here now. It's going to be their 27th year. But
Wow.
regardless of that, there are a lot of Ravens fans that are coming of age now that don't know about 1996, that don't really know about the past, about how we got here, etc. I'm going to put my glasses on for a second, and I want to recite some of these dates. On February 15th of 1996, Ted Marchibroda was named the head coach of the Ravens. On March 29th, about 6 weeks later, actually, he wasn't named coach of the Ravens. He was named coach of the Baltimore football team, okay?
Right.
It was on March 29th, 6 weeks later, that the team was actually named, 6 weeks after they hired the coach, okay? And then it wasn't until April 20th of that year, another 5 weeks later, when the draft was held. And Jonathan Ogden and Ray Lewis became the foundation of the Baltimore Ravens. My question to you is, with all of that tumult and hullabaloo and no colors and no name and moving and all of that stuff, to select two Hall of Fame players with your first two draft choices has got to be an accomplishment, number one. But more importantly, take us back to that time, and what was that all like, culminating with that draft?
It was all Kevin Byrne's doing.
It was.
I tell you what, it was chaos. It really was chaos, and we worked every night, and we were in a building downtown on Pratt Street. We had the old facility that what used to be the Baltimore Police Academy, the city of Baltimore, and that's where we moved in. And Gary, one thing that what you did mention, in the meantime, Art says to Ozzie Newsome, who had been a part-time scout, part-time coach in Cleveland for Bill Belichick, he said, "Look, I want you to run our personnel department. You run the draft." We let Bill Belichick go. So Ozzie was doing this for the first time. And really one of our goals was of that group as we assembled the team, because we were going to have to play games in just a couple of months. And we didn't have a uniform, and we didn't have a logo. And boy, it was a mess. But we basically said, "Look, Oz, go with your scouts, go into a room out there in Owings Mills. We'll leave you alone. Just take for granted that we're going to get everything else ready. And in the meantime, just find good football players." And lo and behold, and it started a trend for us, especially in those early years, until one special draft that we can talk about a little bit later. But the top player on our board, on Ozzie's board, was Jonathan Ogden. And we had the fourth pick in the draft. And we didn't think we were going to get Jonathan Ogden. We assumed one of those three teams ahead of us was going to take him, because he's so clearly, in our minds, the best player. And then we had a second first-round pick because of a trade that Bill Belichick had made for the Cleveland Browns, which we were the year before, and which was the late first-round pick. And we took the undersized middle linebacker from Miami, Ray Lewis. And the rest, as they say, is history. But it was remarkable, as you guys note, and Gary, you especially just now, two Hall of Famers on that first night. It was incredible. And we, to be honest, we didn't know. And I would say this on Ogden. We kind of knew that he was special. I mean, his intelligence is off the charts. And then he walks into the building and he's as big as the door, and he could run faster than our best running back, Ernest Biner. So we knew we had something special.
Let me just jump in. Gary and I usually do two questions at a time, but I got to ask you, at the time, with what you said, all the stuff going on, I wanted, being the big mouth talk show host, I was in the Lawrence Phillips camp.
Yes.
And I want to know, he was an incredible running back at Nebraska. We knew there were problems with him, but because he was such an exciting player, was there a temptation by Art wanting to engage the fans that Jonathan Ogden won't be exciting enough. We got to get, the pizzazz, the sex appeal of Lawrence Phillips, who, by the way, happens to be dead now. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so unfortunately,
Right.
I had a chance the day before the draft. Ozzie met with Art to prepare him for here's what we're thinking about when the draft starts tomorrow. And in that meeting, you're right, Stan, Art brought up Lawrence Phillips when he showed the board, and Phillips wasn't in. I don't think he was in our top 10 even. And Art said, well, everybody says we should take the running back, from
That was
Nebraska.
probably me.
That's right.
Me.
He had been listening to your show.
Yeah.
And Ozzie said, I think my philosophy is you take the best player, and he's not the best player.
Right.
And Art said, well, we don't have, Ernest is an older player. We don't have a great running back right now, plus fans like him, and plus Ted Marchibroda, we have a coach who likes to run the ball, and likes to play physical football. And Ozzie said, yes, but he's not in our top 4, so we're not going to take Lawrence Phillips. And that was pretty, Art didn't say, well, I want Lawrence Phillips, or come on, Oz, we got to sell tickets. He just said, no, I'm giving you responsibility. I'm trusting you. I believe in you, Ozzie. And so certainly Phillips was discussed with Art Modell and Ozzie. I happened to be in that conversation. Whether they had another conversation the next day before the draft, I wasn't privy to that, but I did see the conversation the night before.
Go ahead, Gary. Pick back up, Gary.
Well, I was going to leave it to Kevin. Kevin, you said that there's another draft, a special story about another draft that maybe we could get to a little later. I'm not sure which one you're talking about, but if you have something that you want to divulge, that you think, please go ahead and let us know.
Well, like that first draft, guys, that players kept dropping to us every year of the draft. So we have Ogden number 1, we get him at 4. The next year we have Peter Bulwer up number 2, we get him at number 4. And so they just kept every single year. We win the Super Bowl, and we have the last pick in the first round, and our 15th best player, Todd Heap, falls to us.
Yeah.
And listening to these names, they're all in the Ring of Honor or Hall of Fame players. So we get to the 2003, was it 2002 or 2003 draft? You'll know when I say the player. So we had the 23rd pick in the first round, I believe. And I'm watching this, and all of a sudden, Ozzie goes, there was a linebacker, I can reveal this now, named Napoleon Harris. And Ozzie wanted Napoleon Harris, and he was trying to trade up to get him because he didn't think Napoleon could drop to our spot. And so he calling every team in front of us, kept calling. And then all of a sudden it gets to a pick, and Oakland trades into the slot, and he goes, uh-oh, Oakland's going up to get Napoleon Harris. That's our guy. Sure enough, the Raiders take Napoleon Harris. Now we get to the 23rd pick, and I look at the board, the first 22 are gone. It's going to be the first time in our history that we have to take the player graded 23rd best on our draft. And I remember Phil Savage, who later became general manager of the Browns, and it was our director of personnel. He came over to me and he goes, look, this guy's not going to look like much when he walks in the building. He's kind of pigeon-toed and bull-legged, but he was captain of maybe one of the great defenses in the history of college football down at Miami. We're going to take this safety named Ed Reed, and I'm going like Slum Shoulder. We got to take Ed Reed, and holy cow, look what happens. He becomes another Hall of Fame draft pick by Ozzie and his crew. So sometimes you could be in that room thinking, oh, we got to get that guy, Napoleon Harris. We're not going to have Napoleon Harris, for God's sake. And you end up with a pigeon-toed Ed Reed, and you turn out to be geniuses for life. And so that's always one of my favorite draft room stories.
That's great.
Kevin, Ozzie Newsome, you still know him pretty well, and I imagine you still talk to him. This would really be more a question for him. Is he still as engaged with the draft, even though Eric has the position of general manager? Is he still in there fighting for who he believes we should take or helping Eric?
He still has the Ozzie Newsome point of view, and
Yep.
that carries so much weight. There's a reason that Ozzie's still there, and we should all be thankful that he likes living in Baltimore. His wife enjoys it, and that he and Eric are like brothers. I mean, Ozzie is how would I describe, a very serious gentleman with a good sense of humor. The person who makes him laugh the most is Eric DeCosta. And I think it was always helpful for Ozzie to have Eric there, you know, and when the room gets tight, when they have the draft meetings, which are going on now, Eric was very good at getting Ozzie, okay, we're just let us have our point of view. And when Ozzie wanted to make a stand, you know, then Eric could support him. But the way Eric uses Ozzie, he basically says, Oz, here are 100 players. Here's our 1 through 100 that we have decided. Can you look at all 100 and come back and give a detailed report on each of those? And
Wow.
They did. And so he does. And then with John Harbaugh, Ozzie never traveled. Like, you know, a lot of guys in charge of the draft would travel, go to college games. Ozzie didn't think that was great use of time for him.
Mm-hmm.
He thought it was better to watch his team, the Ravens, practice every day to see what was needed and to see how things were going. And also, he didn't want players going to John or another coach whining about a contract or wanting a new contract. He wanted them, Ozzie's there every day, you come see me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he still does that. He goes to every practice. And then what he'll do, he'll watch the practice. Then afterwards, he'll go back to his office and watch the tape of practice. And then he'll talk to John or the assistants, certainly Eric, because Eric sits with him during practice and gives his point of view. What is the value of that? What is the value? And Steve Bisciotti goes to Ozzie every year and says, hey, Oz, I know you'd probably like to return to Alabama someday, but please hang around. And for whatever you do, don't go to another team. You know, and so as Steve said at the time when Ozzie was passing the baton to Eric, he looked at Ozzie and said, Ozzie, I don't know what you want to be called, but you're going to be the highest paid whatever it is for the rest of your life. And so God bless Ozzie. To have that value in that room is so powerful.
Yeah, Kevin, one more question on the draft, and then maybe we move on to some other stuff. But the parallels between two drafts and the post-draft success, to me, is pretty striking. And what I'm talking about is the 96 draft that we've already talked about a little bit, the two Hall of Famers, John Ogden and Ray Lewis. And then 4 years later, the Ravens win the Super Bowl in the year 2000. I go now to the 2008 draft. And while the careers of Joe Flacco and Ray Rice may not equal the careers of John Ogden and Ray Lewis, certainly two big pieces to the Ravens. And 4 years later, the Ravens win the Super Bowl. I know you didn't plan it that way, but do you ever look back and you ever think about those parallels, those key pieces that were foundations of teams that after you added some other players, that Super Bowl success happened?
Well, with Joe Flacco, it was because the room was so universally in love with Joe. And they had gone to Delaware for a workout. And it was Eric DeCosta, George Kokinis, Cameron, who was our offensive coordinator at the time.
Right.
And there was one other, I forgot whom. But I remember after the workout, Eric telling me the story that Cam, who was driving the car, said, don't anybody look at each other. Don't anybody say a word till we're on the turnpike, so till we're on 95 coming back. And then Eric says, once they got to 95, it was silence, for like a half hour. They all looked at each other and go, wow. Then you have to get them. And we drafted him as 18. We were sitting at 23. Now, I do remember this. There were some in the room who felt that we could get Joe at 23. And that was based on the study of the other teams ahead of us, that nobody was going to take Joe. And Steve Bisciotti, I remember saying in the room, he says, well, yeah, but you guys are always telling me it only takes one team. What about somebody else might be in love with Joe as much as we do, and they'll trade up in front of 23? You know, why don't we try to move up? Why don't we try to move up? And then somebody in the room says, no, we can stay at 23 and get them. And I remember Steve saying, let's not be pigs about draft picks here, guys. If we love Joe, he didn't use that exact term either. He goes, if we all love Joe Flacco and everybody in this room loves Joe Flacco, then Ozzie, why don't we go get him?
Yeah, we'll go get him.
And then Ozzie, it was calling all the teams in front. It was the 18th pick. We got up there and we took him, and we lived happily ever after. And I also remember this. After the second day of minicamp with Joe, I was walking with Ray Lewis downstairs at the facility, and he looked at me and goes, we got one. We finally got one. You know, because we had struggled with the quarterback position.
Yeah.
And so after 2 practices in minicamp, Ray Lewis had already put the King's hat on Joe, saying we got one. And that does. But you're right. Do you look 4 years? You know, when I'm sitting there and I'm sitting with Don Martindale in the draft room at the kiddies table in the draft room, and Don says to me, because I was not paying attention, it was the end of the first round. I thought we were done, you know, and he goes, hey, I think we're trying to trade up to get the last pick in the first round. I think we're trying to go get that quarterback from Louisville. And then I really started paying attention. And then, you know, and then we got him. And we had the 16th pick in that first round, and we traded down and took Hayden Hurst, the tight end. And so when we were at 16, I said to Don Martindale, I said, wait, there's no chance we're taking a defensive player at 16. If you were in charge of this draft, what offensive player would you take? And he didn't hesitate a second. He says, I'll tell you what, I'd take that quarterback from Louisville. He's the fastest guy I've ever seen on film.
Wow.
On video.
Yeah.
You know, and he goes, that guy, I don't know how you defend him. I don't know how, because he can throw too. And I got Wink saying that when we have at 16. At 23, we take the tight end, who's a good player, Hayden Hurst. And then voila, we get back in the first round with a trade with Philadelphia Eagles, and we take Lamar Jackson. And is this 4 years later? Or 5 years?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, actually it is.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hey, we wanted to touch base on something with the changes going on in the Ravens hierarchy right now, but I did want to go back all the way to 1995, 96, when you first arrived here in town. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but just, can you tell the viewers that might, now that the Ravens are so established in Baltimore, what it was like back then and how hard it was to gain that kind of the adoration that the Colts had and the fans had lost, and sort of half of them wanting to embrace again, half of them afraid to. Could you talk a little about that, Kevin?
Well, you know, I think one thing we sensed right away, Stan, and you would recognize it even better than me, is that fans, that half, and it could have been more, felt, well, are we getting another Bob Irsay here?
Yeah.
You know, are we getting, which Art Modell, did Art do to Cleveland what Irsay did to us? And they didn't want to embrace somebody like that. So we knew at the time, you guys didn't, that there's no parallel between Art Modell and Bob Irsay. And so what we did, and you'll remember this, we put out Art Modell out publicly everywhere. That's the first thing we did. So he went on every radio show. He went to TV stations. He did morning shows on television. I mean, we just want to show this is who you're buying. You're buying Art Modell. The second thing we knew we had to do is reach out to the Baltimore Colts who still live in the general area. And I think there were 60 of them or 58 of them. And they actually had a group that met once a month.
Yep.
And
Right.
so we would send people to go over to their meetings and talk to them and say who we are. And I remember I spoke one time and Bruce Laird was in charge of the group, and Lenny Moore was there, and they go, you know what, it's great that you're here, but we'd really like to meet Art Modell. I go, when's your next meeting? He'll be here. And he came. And then we invited those Baltimore Colts to come to the first game. And I think that was a key to life. Yeah. You know, and they came and they formed a gauntlet for our players to run through. We had jackets for them that said Baltimore Colts on them. They were white jackets. But then when they reversed them, we asked them to reverse after we introduced them, and it said Ravens on it. So it was like them telling the fans it's okay to like these guys. And the fact that the Lenny Moores and John Unitas and Gino Marchetti and Bruce Laird and Stan White, all those guys, Volk, God, they were just so gracious to us. We told them they can come to practice anytime they want. That's still the case today. Lenny comes every Thursday during the season. And so that was special for us. It meant a lot to us.
You know, PR to a large extent is a lot of times like threading a needle. Would you say in your PR career that time period was as hard as anything you had to do in your career?
Without a doubt. While it was exciting, it was like, you don't think about it when you're going through a season, but when you're creating it, you know, we didn't have a manifest for Memorial Stadium. Memorial Stadium, I remember we brought 5 players over from Cleveland right after the season to introduce them to the community. Vinny Testaverde, Tony Jones, Ernest Biner, Eric Turner. You know, and we took them to Memorial Stadium, and I remember them all saying, "This is better than what we're leaving." You know? I mean, we didn't have running water at Cleveland Stadium some of the times, and so I'm thinking, well, this is the place they're going to tear down. This is pretty good, you know.
Right. That is
good. But it was, you know, you had to sell tickets. We didn't have a name. We didn't have colors. We didn't have a design. There were so many pieces, and we had to assemble a staff, you know, because we only brought a handful from Cleveland, and remarkably to us, a lot of Baltimore Oriole executives knocked on our door, and they became part of our spine. Roy Summerhoffs and Baker Koppelmans and that group, Aaron Cashman. I can name 15 of them. Dave Cope that joined us in significant positions, and they taught us about Baltimore and made us Baltimoreans in a hurry.
That's great stuff. Go ahead, Gary.
So Kevin, it's interesting. Stan talks about the first days, the transition from Cleveland to Baltimore. Let's fast forward to a minute to the present days. So now here we are, we're 27 years later, and you know, fans are very familiar with the fact that rosters change. They go through a metamorphosis every year. 7 players, 8 players, 10 players, 12 players change out every year, the draft, veterans, etc. They may not be quite aware that the people in the administration are also changing. And so here we are 27 years later, and you've retired. Dick Cass retired this offseason. Roy Summerhoff retired as well. And now Bob Eller, who is a great friend of mine, and I know he's a great friend and peer of yours, after, again, 27 years with the franchise here in Baltimore. Just talk a little bit about, from that perspective, Kevin, as not only do the fans see the players turn over, but now the veterans who make it all happen behind the players are starting to turn over.
Well, it's going to sound like bragging, but I think there is a Ravens way. You know, it's just like when we came to town, all we heard about was the Orioles way. And the Orioles were winning every year and competing for championships every year. The Ravens have that now. If you look at the transition from Ozzie to Eric DeCosta, Ozzie hired Eric as an intern in 1996. And then Eric becomes the executive vice president, general manager. Chad Steele, who replaced me, started as an intern with us, then went to ESPN, then went to the 49ers, and then comes back. So we've had a good a chain, so to speak, of people who grew up in the culture. You know, Bob Eller, who was a local guy who had worked with us in Cleveland. Now he's coming home. He was giving us early Baltimore knowledge. And so there's a certain culture I think we have. We haven't had a lot of turnover, and we're aging out instead of having to fire heads of department because they aren't good. You know, Steve Bisciotti made his money, you know, hiring people.
Yeah,
personnel.
That's
Personnel.
how he made his fortune, his original fortunes. And so I think Steve has a knack. I think it's like the hiring of John Harbaugh, you know, who was not on anybody's radar as a head coach. And heck, he had interviewed for the UCLA job the month before and didn't get it.
Yeah.
Thank God. You know, so I think there's a certain way that I think there's a certain type of person we want in the organization. And I think our product reflects that.
I'll let Gary get the next question. I got to jump in. There's some kind of funny story about Bob Eller and about him interviewing with you. Can you
Well, I try to
relate
make
that
it shorter, but Bob Eller was the director of public relations for the Indianapolis Colts. And I'm at the time VP of public relations for the Cleveland Browns. And unfortunately, my top assistant was killed in a car crash. And so Bob called me after the end of that season and said, "Hey, I would like to talk to you about your assistant position." And I was really surprised at that, you know. And so I said, "Well, Bob, you know, I haven't made a decision. I really haven't started interviewing. I'm going to do it right. I'm going to start at the Super Bowl, actually, because I was going to go work the Super Bowl." And he said, "Well, I'll come if you'll give me some time." I said, "Friday afternoon." So Bob and I sat down for 2 hours on a Friday afternoon at the Super Bowl, and we talked, and it's clear that we hit it off. And at the end of it, now he was the director of public relations for the Indianapolis Colts, who were owned by Bob Irsay. And so I asked Bob, I said, "Listen, Bob, let me ask you the biggest question. There are only 32 of these jobs. They're really hard to get. I'm not that much older than you are. Why would you be willing to give up one of these jobs where you're the boss, you're the director, to come to another place and be an assistant?" And this says a lot about Bob as a person and also his humor. He looks at me with a little wry smile and he says, "Well, because Mr. Irsay thinks my name is Larry." So I said, "Okay, Bob, we'll talk some more, but I think this is going to work out."
You know, my brother did a TV commercial with Bubba Smith for the News American back, you know, when Irsay owned the team. And he brings, Bob Irsay brought some of his friends to the set. And he goes, "I want you to meet my star player, Bobo."
Oh, jeez. Holy cow. By the way, your brother Alan,
Yep.
the commercial he put together for us to sell tickets of football players pushing a tackling sled through all the landmarks of Baltimore was genius.
Great. Yeah.
It was genius.
I'll let him know you said that. I know you're a friend of all the Josh's TV show starts.
Yes.
His new movie starts next week
Oh, good.
on HBO. We Own This City. Gary, I know you got another couple questions.
I mean, I'm not going to necessarily wrap it up, but I just want to find out what you're doing now. I was with you. I mean, literally, we would sit 2 seats apart next to each other for 20 years up there in the press box. We'd have our highs and we'd have our lows together and all that. And I miss you, obviously.
Thank you.
We all do. But what do you do now? What's your life filled with right now?
Well, we are outside every day. I play golf. I play pickleball.
That's a great game. I hear that's a great game.
It is.
It's a great game.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, it's the fastest growing sport in America. And it's really a fun, challenging game. And a lot of older people are playing it because you're less likely to get hurt. Although Leanne Curl, Dr. Curl, the Ravens team doctor, when I was telling her I was playing pickleball and fastest growing sport and a lot of older people, and she smiled, she goes, "Oh yeah, you old pickleball players are keeping me in business. So, yeah, we're doing that. I stay in contact. I connected with, in fact, John Harbaugh last night. Eric keeps me entertained with funny texts or things he's doing to terrorize people in the office, because Eric DeCosta's way of relaxing is to pull pranks on his fellow workers, especially Vice President of Football Operations, Pat Moriarty. So I miss that group. I do. But we have 2 sons, and our grandson is in Baltimore, so we certainly get up there on a regular basis.
Kevin,
That's
before
great.
we let you go, I wanted to ask you one question, because I think when fans embrace an organization, they like to think of it as a family, and that they can put things behind them, because all families have spiffs and fights and all that. Brian Billick, if you had to look back now on what happened, but not between him and Steve, we kind of know that what initially caused the rift. What brought them back together again enough for Steve to really push the fact he wanted him to be in the Ring of Honor, and then bring him back to do preseason football games and make it okay for fans to like John Harbaugh and still embrace the original Super Bowl winning coach?
And Brian and Harbs have become buddies.
Yes, I
Yeah.
bet they have.
Which is interesting. So it really is, time is, heals all wounds, as they say. The Brian's wife, Kim, and his daughters, they probably had a harder time forgiving Steve Bisciotti than Brian did. Brian knew as a fact of life. Brian was going into his 10th year. He had a brand new contract. He was on the first of a 4-year contract. And Steve felt that, in hearing from some people in the organization, that Brian had lost the locker room that season. This was a year after going 13-3. And so Steve made a hard decision, because Brian's hard to replace. He's such a prominent guy, and had won the Super Bowl, and had just gone 13-3, 12 months before Steve brings him in and says, I'm going to make a change. So, but I think Steve realized, and Brian realized, that was just part of the business at the time. Could they do it over? Would it change? I'm not sure it would change.
Yeah.
It just happens in football. John Harbaugh is a real rarity that he's lasted this long. But he's 3rd in seniority right now, behind Belichick and Mike Tomlin.
Yep.
So, but Brian is still a part of the family, and doing preseason television and all that stuff. He didn't do it last year just because the transportation to get him here was going to become too hard for Brian, not for the Ravens. Ravens would have figured out a way. Brian and I are very close. He's been down to our house
I know you are.
twice recently. He's become a golfer. He used to make fun of people who played golf. Now he golfs, and he works at the game all the time. And he has 2 grandsons in Columbus, so they have a house in Columbus, and then he has a summer home in Upper Minnesota. And so, but he and Kim are doing very, very well.
Well, I think it speaks to the maturity of the organization that somehow they were able to put that behind them, because fans don't like rifts between people that they love.
That's the best word, Stan. Maturity. I think that's a great way to describe it. There is a maturity that comes on all sides. And in fact, there was last season they had a dinner for me, and Steve brought in Brian for the dinner, and it was a lovely event. Spouses were there, and it was funny that as you looked around the table, it seemed like Brian and Steve were talking more than anybody else in the room. I think they like each other, and
they always did.
Yeah.
All right.
That's great.
That's great. And that's very fascinating that Harbs and Billick have become good friends too.
Yeah, they have.
All right. Kevin, we always appreciate the time when we are able to get together. You're a special guy, and you brought a special thing to this town. There's no question about it.
Well, thank you, Stan. Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure to be with you. It was fun. I enjoyed this.
Thank you, Kevin.
We'll do it again sometime. All right.
All right.
All right. Want to remind everybody that this show is brought to you by the Costas Inn, 4100 North Point Boulevard, 410-477-1975, thecostasinn.com for the best carry out around. For Kevin Byrne, Gary Stein, I'm Stan the Fan, and we'll see you down the road just a little bit.